welcome everybody to what I hope you'll all agree is perhaps the most rock and roll academic discussion you're ever likely to encounter. And this is a fantastic showcase in some really important issues that we're all struggling to deal with at the moment, and of course artificial intelligence is right up there.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Dixon, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts, and I would like to welcome you all tonight to the first Arts After Dark event of 2025, Empowering Education Through AI, Revolution or Evolution. This is the third year that the Arts After Dark series has run, and tonight we are pleased to welcome both our returning guests and new members of the wider Macquarie University community and public, including many from our alumni community, as well as those who've joined us from local schools. Before we proceed any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which this university is situated, the Wallumattagal people of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to the Darug people and the Wallumattagal clan. Tonight, we will be hearing from our special guest and Macquarie University School of Education alumnus, Dr. Paul Wood, and our esteemed academic colleagues from Macquarie University's Faculty of Arts as they explore the opportunities and challenges brought on by the increasing integration, influence and impact of artificial intelligence into education. Just before we begin proceedings, I would like to thank my Macquarie University colleagues for organising tonight's events. In particular, I thank Gemma Ryan, the Faculty's Manager of Strategic Projects, for all the work that she's put into transforming an idea into an event. Many thanks, Gemma. To get the night started, I would like to welcome our host, Professor Peter Greste, from the Faculty's School of Communication, Society and Culture. Peter is an award-winning journalist, speaker, and an energetic advocate for journalistic freedom. We are delighted he has joined us here tonight to host this evening's event. Thank you, and welcome back, Peter.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody to, I guess you guys should count yourselves amongst some of the hardiest people in Sydney this evening. And welcome also to, I think, what I hope you'll all agree is perhaps the most rock and roll academic discussion you're ever likely to encounter. It's a great honour, of course, to be chairing and hosting these events. I'm very proud of Macquarie University for what they're able to do, and this is a fantastic showcase, really, for the role that the arts faculty plays in some really important issues that we're all struggling to deal with at the moment, and of course artificial intelligence is right up there. Before we get things underway, just a few housekeeping points. First of all, the bathrooms are located on the behind me on the stage here, well, not on the stage, behind the stage. And if you need to stretch your legs, please feel free to go to the back of the building. And of course, as is always in these events, please turn your phones to silent. The order of proceedings this evening. First up, we're going to have a keynote speaker, as we've already heard, from Paul Wood from the New South Wales Department of Education. And I'll introduce Paul in a moment. Then we're going to have a panel discussion with some of the extraordinary academics from education from here in Macquarie University to help unpack and make sense of some of the big issues around artificial intelligence in education. And then, of course, we will have the audience Q&A. For those of you who've been here before, you'll be familiar with it. We are using the Slido app to send questions. There's the QR code that you can see up on the screen at the moment, and if you click on that, if you point to that, that'll get you straight to the Slido page where you can enter your questions or upvote any that appeal to you. Alternatively, you can also go to the slido.com website and use the code 2823384. And of course, we will also have roving microphones for the old-fashioned amongst you who prefer to use voice. Right. Next, our keynote speaker, Dr. Paul Wood. Dr. Paul Wood is, of course, an alumnus of the School of Education. He is the Executive Director for Teaching and Learning Support in the New South Wales Department of Education. His office is responsible for integrating AI into education, including its generative AI tool for students, New South Wales NSWEduChat. Paul, the stage is yours.
It's dark up here. I'm going to have trouble reading my notes, but that's okay. Can I thank Macquarie University for inviting me back here today. It is always a privilege to be back on the grounds of Macquarie University. It is quite some time since I was here as a student, and I won't mention the number of years, but it's a really exciting opportunity to talk to you tonight. I know this is a really important topic. I know it's something that people are really interested in, and I look forward to the wisdom of the academics who will join up on stage in a little while. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time just, I suppose, reflecting on what we're doing in New South Wales and how we're responding to the opportunities and challenges. On the 7th of February, an article appeared in, a range of media outlets, but one of them in particular at news.com.au, Australia's public education systems ban the chatbot. It was one of many in the early months of 2023 when ChatGPT burst onto the scene. It reads, most public school students in Australia are now barred from using popular artificial intelligence technology over cheating concerns. New South Wales was the first state to ban the application from school grounds in late January, ahead of the start of term 1. That's not quite what we did, and cheating wasn't exactly why we did it, but semantics. That was 2.5 years ago. And here we are, AI is still attracting attention from educational institutions to varying degrees. They remain combinations of enthusiastic, ambitious, cautious, concerned, and even sceptical about embracing AI and its impact on education, and in particular when it comes to students and student learning. Revolution or evolution? Turn now to Term 1, 2024. 1 year later, the news headline reads, Safety First, as New South Wales public schools trial new purpose-built AI tool for students. And then 9 months later in September, the headline was the expansion of AI in education tool trial delivers more time for teachers in classrooms. Empowering education, evolution or revolution? These are big questions that absolutely cannot be done justice in 15 minutes. So too the themes of tonight's discussions, AI and the role of educators, fostering critical thinking, promoting educational equity and supporting culturally responsive learning. What are our ethical responsibilities when integrating AI into our classrooms? Can it help bridge rather than widen the digital divide? I can't do justice to these big questions, but what I can say, thinking about exactly these questions is what is driving how New South Wales, as one of the largest education systems, is thinking about the role of AI in schools for our teachers, our support staff, and particularly for our students. And what I can do is briefly give you a glimpse into the way that New South Wales education are approaching this, and ask you to consider these questions and think and reflect for yourselves, like we ask our students to do when they're using technology. So I found myself across this time as a bit of an accidental spokesperson for generative AI, initially because I lead a team that supports students around student assessment. I'm a teacher and an educator, and whilst, like everyone else, I'm interested in how technology and AI can benefit me and my work, what I'm really interested in is what this means for teaching and learning in a classroom and for students. Can we flick to the next slide for me? Oh, I've got it here. Sorry, I didn't realise I was driving this myself. To some degree, I feel like these big questions that we're asking about the teacher's role and critical thinking and ethics and equity are the things that we've been grappling with and have not significantly changed since we commenced some work on the Australian framework for generative AI in schools. That framework talks exactly about these principles: teaching and learning, human and social well-being, transparency, fairness, accountability, privacy, security and safety. These are really important principles that we can consider and address in different ways. But from a teaching and learning perspective, I think it's quite difficult to consider and explore unless we actually engage with AI and unless we actually start to build some confidence and some capacity in our staff and our students to harness its potential. But do this in considered and supportive ways, recognising that actually we all have a lot to learn. I don't really want to make this an infomercial about New South Wales EduChat, although I will say we are very proud of the work that we've done in this space. We have conversations internationally. We presented it at EduTech a month ago. There is a lot of interest in the way New South Wales is leading in this work. And we're proud of the things that we are doing. But what I want to do is talk about how this illustrates how we're approaching some of these challenges and some of these big questions of the emergence of AI into our daily work and our personal lives. How such a large system manages these risks. How do we not be risk averse and remain open to the benefits? How do we not limit learning but enhance it? How do we do this cautiously whilst the evidence is still emerging? New South Wales EduChat is part of the ways that we are looking at doing this. So let me spend a few minutes on what is it, and more importantly, why New South Wales EduChat. So EduChat is a tool developed specifically for New South Wales students and teachers. We've not built our own AI. We're still powered by and utilise the large language models. But we've put in the safeguards that we need to feel confident that we are considering the risks and keeping focused on the human endeavour that involves teachers and students in learning. For teachers and students, this means things like we keep the data in our systems and we built in content filtering to more closely align the outputs to our curriculum and our community standards. For our students in our 50 trial schools that we're still working with, it means teaching, learning and student safety is the driving consideration. It's designed to support student learning, not just produce outputs. It's based on Socratic questioning. Students enhance their learning through guided questioning. It uses the method to encourage deep thinking and explore ideas and beliefs for students by asking questions that challenge students' assumptions, clarify concepts, and examine the implications of different viewpoints. The intention is not just to answer questions, but to foster that thinking as students start to engage with technology. And we know the evidence is still emerging, and hence our cautious approach. We are still in trial in 50 schools for our students. But I will tell you, and I'm not sure if any of them are here, but they are our strongest advocates of the work as they have had the opportunity to learn with the tools. But I'm going to do something really brave, because unless you are from a New South Wales public school, and a teacher who has access to our tool, or you are one of our trial schools, and I know there's at least one student here, but if there are any students here who are playing with the tool, this is all a bit theoretical. So I'm going to do something a little bit brave, and I'm actually going to invite my colleague Dan Hart to just give you a little demonstration of the Student EduChat version operating in Socratic mode. And I'm going to move over here so I can see. And all the best laid plans, we've now lost our internet connection. And this is where we be agile with technology, as all good teachers are. And we're going to talk a little bit, while he tries to get this working, back around the role of the teacher. Because what I wanted to show you was when we've got students working with New South Wales NSWEduChat in Socratic mode, we are not replacing the teacher. We are not outsourcing our learning to AI. But what we're actually doing is reinforcing that critical role that a teacher plays in the work that they do. And that critical role that a teacher plays, sorry Dan, that critical role that a teacher plays in that work is that in order for a student to engage in New South Wales NSWEduChat in a Socratic mode, they need to bring their knowledge into the learning. They need to bring that deep content knowledge that they've been taught in the classroom by their teacher. They need to bring that critical thinking. They need to bring that learning about learning, metacognition. They need to understand all of those skills that we know that our teachers are responsible for doing in classrooms every day. That can't be replaced by the tool. That can only be enhanced as students start to engage in conversations that enables them to demonstrate excellent their learning. So now I'm going to show you. So we've asked a Year 10 student to engage in tonight's conversation debate with EduChat in the Socratic mode. So you can see, I'm a Year 10 student. I'm learning how to debate. Can you debate me by making one argument at a time and rebutting my arguments? The topic is AI will revolutionise education. I disagree. You start the debate. Start with an argument, try this sentence. What you will hear from people is talking about the importance of prompting and what we know.
While I understand you're eager to engage in a debate, I can't participate in that way. However, I can help you learn how to structure your arguments or provide you with some information on the topic. To start, consider researching how AI can provide personalised learning experiences for students, adapting to their individual learning styles and needs. What do you think about this idea? Can you think of a counter-argument against it?
So my counter-argument against it would be that my teacher understands more about me and more about my individual learning needs than a technology tool can do.
That's a strong point. It highlights the importance of human connection and understanding in education. Now, consider this. While teachers have valuable insights into their students, AI can analyze vast amounts of data from many students to identify trends and suggest tailored resources. This can help teachers focus on areas where students need the most support. What do you think about the potential of AI to assist teachers rather than replace them? Can you formulate a rebuttal?
AI can only do this based on the data that it's learning from. That data contains inherent biases. If I'm a student... Sorry.
I'm not a machine.
You can finish on that. That data contains inherent biases.
You're absolutely correct. Bias in data is a significant concern when it comes to AI. It can lead to unfair or inaccurate outcomes, potentially disadvantaging certain groups of students. However, it's important to note that ongoing efforts are being made to address these biases through better data collection and algorithm design. AI systems can be continuously improved to reduce bias and enhance fairness in educational tools. How do you think the education sector can work to ensure AI is used responsibly and equitably? What would your next argument or counter-argument be?
I'm going to stop. Look, and part of what I'm trying to do is not necessarily answer all the questions around the challenges that we face around AI, the potential benefits and the risks, but to illustrate some of the ways in which we're trying to think about those challenges. So let me come back again quickly to the role of the teacher and the work that the teacher needs to do. Let me reinforce again that part of the job of a teacher in a classroom, as many of the educators in this room will know, is to support students to think about learning. It supports students to make sure that they're building on that foundation of deep content knowledge, that they're engaging in critical thinking. They've got the ability to be able to engage in conversations that recognises bias, that recognises when things might be incorrect, and not be able to take those assumptions on. And so part of what we've done in building Socratic questioning into the tool for students is to ensure that what we are doing is providing a tool that can actually enhance students and their learning, that requires them to bring their learning into the work with AI and into the conversations. What that also requires, however, is teachers to be able to understand the tools that they're using as well, to be able to bring their knowledge, their understanding around how AI functions, its biases, its hallucinations, where it draws its data from. And so educating both our teaching workforce and our students is a really important part of the process that we want to engage in with New South Wales, because we know that inherent with AI does come risk and bias, and that educative process is a really critically important part of what we want to do. I find myself constantly in education returning to standards 1 and 2 of the Australian professional teaching standards. Know your content and how to teach it, know your students and how to learn. I flipped them the other way around, but that does not change when we have technology tools. And it is the combination of both of those things, knowing our students and how they learn, knowing our content and how we teach it, that remains unchanged in the face of technology. In fact, becomes more important, I think, in the role of the teacher to harness effectively these sorts of tools. I'm going to segue a little bit now because, like I said, 15 minutes, all I'm going to be able to do is talk about how we're grappling with things and throw out some of the opportunities for you to either critically ask us some questions or critically reflect for yourself in the panel discussion that follows. The other thing that we also want to really think about that you saw in the Australian Professional Standards is that idea of equity. And I want to come at equity from 2 perspectives. One of them, we have 1.2 million students in New South Wales public schools. That student population is incredibly diverse. We want to make sure that students' access to opportunity is not driven by their personal circumstances. So trialling a tool like NSWEduChat, thinking about its benefits, thinking about how we can use AI as an opportunity to harness education, enables us to then think about providing that to all of our students, to be able to think about how we might level the playing field. Now, we're not there yet. We're still learning. We're still in trial in 50 schools. But our plan would be to ensure that we are always thinking about equity, always thinking about how do we level that playing field for our students and make sure that we are helping bridge a digital divide, that we are not having haves and have-nots that are driven by who has the resources to be able to access the tools in the best way. The other way we want to think about equity is to be able to make sure that we are actively teaching our students around the things they need to consider and our staff around the things they need to consider around bias, around flattening diversity of thought when we're thinking about how large language models are developing their ideas and the algorithms that they're using to drive that content. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about how we can educate our students to be aware of how sometimes what you will see is reinforcing bias and reinforcing inequity. So the equity thing is about access and opportunity, but the equity thing is also about education. I'm probably, and I'm going to blame the technical hiccup going a little bit over time, but I want to just spend just this last moment letting you hear from a student. So we've been trialling this. This is a young student who's using NSWEduChat with their teacher in a way that is trying to enhance what they're doing in a classroom. Do I just press play? Okay, let's hope this works. No. 2 for 2, I'm going well. I'm going to pause there. We will find an opportunity to show you that, or I'll send you where to show you that. But what I'll tell you what happens in that video. I have a young man who's developing, writing a letter to a potential employer for an opportunity. His teacher sits down with him, and sentence at a time, paragraph at a time, they use NSWEduChat to enhance that writing. But they sit together and they reflect on the language used, its reflection of the student, how it can strengthen. So they didn't put it in and just say, rewrite it for me and send it off. They sat there and they worked together to think about how I can improve my own writing and how I can make this more reflective. It's much more powerful when the young man tells the story than when I tell the story, and we'll find an opportunity to do it. But look, what I wanted to be able to spend some time tonight just giving you a glimpse of is we're aware that AI comes with challenge. We're aware that AI, like many other technology tools, comes with great promise and often hype. But we're also aware that the education part of this process is critically important. We're aware of our responsibilities to our young people to ensure that we can support them to develop those critical skills that they need as they move into employment and work and adult life. New South Wales EduChat is our way of not putting our head in the sand and saying, it's too risky, we're not going to work with it, with AI. It's our way of saying, actually, what we want to be able to do is support our students to think about how we can benefit. We want to support our teachers to think about how we can benefit. And we want to use it as an educative process to support us to think about those opportunities. We want to continue to do this work. We want to continue to learn about this work. And we want to continue to be challenged by the skeptics and by those who question the way that we're using the tools, because it is only through that we are actually going to continue to ensure that what we are doing is ethically using technology in a way that produces benefits. You will now, I'm sure, hear so much more from our colleagues who are going to join on the panel in a moment. And I thank you for the opportunity to just share this briefly with you as an introduction to tonight's discussions. Thank you.
I've got it. Thank you very much, Paul. That was a really enlightening, and I think at times, well, obviously a very encouraging, fascinating glimpse. But I have to admit that I am also, and I think I mentioned this when we were chatting earlier, that I am also going to play the role of the skeptic this evening, because there is a lot about this that I think, while I get very excited by its potential, also scares the daylights out of me. Before we get onto the panel discussion, first we have an apology this evening. The remarkable Dr. Tamika Matthias was to join us. She's back home sick, unfortunately, with the flu that seems to have laid low so many people at the moment. Her research explores Indigenous representation, education and digital lives, including artificial intelligence. And we invited her because she represents an important part of this conversation. In fact, Paul, you alluded to the issues of inclusion and equity. Even though we won't have her here this evening, I have been in conversation with her, and I'm going to, if not represent her views, at least raise some of the issues that she's concerned about in the questions this evening. So let me just go back to before we get started, just to remind you about the Slido app for questions. Please, if anything pops into your head, put them into the Slido app. The QR code is there. And of course, if that doesn't work, then slido.com and use the code 2823384. And of course, if that doesn't work again, as I said, for those of you who aren't into the app, we've got old-fashioned technology, old-fashioned voices. Can we have, okay, maybe I'm not speaking a little loud enough. Are we up the volume? Can you hear me now? No problem. Thank you very much. So, let me introduce our two panellists. First up, Matt Bauer, Professor of Educational Technology here at the Macquarie School of Education. He specialises in the innovative use of technology to improve learning outcomes and experiences. He's also just published a book on creative technologies for students. And Dr. Jodie Torrington, also a researcher, educator and manager of the Teachers Learning Hub here also at the School of Education. She's interested in self-regulation for learning in digital contexts and using AI effectively for teaching and learning. Jodie just recently returned from a trip to Dublin where both she and Matt were part of the AI learning design team at a UNESCO Education Summit. So, first of all, I'm going to make one more point before I begin, and that's to recognise that AI is a very, very short term that covers a whole raft of applications. Obviously, we've been hearing about teaching and learning applications. It also goes into assessments and also into administrative tasks. We're going to confine the conversation to the classroom and to assessments. While those other issues are relevant, we're going to try and contain the conversation. First, Paul, I just wanted to challenge you on something. You said that you're not going to be replacing teachers. You're not going to be outsourcing education to AI. And I hear that, and on the website you say quite explicitly that this is to support and enhance teaching. But let's be honest about this. In an environment where cost is everything, where we're always trying to reduce the costs, and everyone here in this room knows how that works, surely there must be an overwhelming temptation to replace a teacher, a highly educated professional teacher with, say, a teaching assistant overseeing kids doing learning, working with NSWEduChat in a classroom of 50 or 60 kids. Surely that must be where the temptation is to take this technology.
I'd probably respond by saying, who's tempted? Because what I would say is any of the conversations that I sit in around the way that we are looking at AI, thinking about AI, does not ever go to the place of replacing the human endeavour, does not ever go to the place of this would be a cheaper way than us being able to get those experts in the classroom. Now, there may be others who are having those conversations, but I can tell you when we talk about how we use AI, and that would be from myself to senior executive that I engage with across the department, AI as a cost efficiency in the way that we work with our young people is never a topic of the conversation.
Matt, last year you published a paper on how teachers broadly think about AI and how it might transform their jobs. And one of the things that came up in that paper was what you described as the ignorance gap, that the less teachers knew and understood about AI, the less that they were likely to see it as transformative. What do you think? How transformative is AI going to be to the classroom?
Look, it's playing out in real time. I've been in technology for a long time, and we've all sort of grown up and seen the influence of technology in education, and this appears to be moving about 10 times quicker than previous incarnations of technology. I think it's poised to potentially have a very big impact, whether that's a positive or a negative impact, and obviously it will be bits of both in different areas and for different people, but always depending on how we use it. So all of our efforts really, or at least a huge component of them, need to focus on using it judiciously, well, safely, but hopefully also really quite innovatively.
Are teachers worried about the kinds of the questions that I raised, that we're going to see that the classrooms become more automated, that there's going to be a smaller role for teachers?
I think that there are some teachers who do have some sort of trepidations, but that quote from Arthur C. Clarke, that any teacher that can be replaced by technology probably should be. I think that there's a whole lot of extra things that a teacher does beyond just delivering knowledge. And that was sort of a fear with Wikipedia, and oh gosh, what if the teacher isn't the sage on the stage, the possessor of all knowledge? Does that mean that they're all of a sudden redundant? And the answer is obviously and most definitely no, that teachers fulfill a much bigger role than just delivering knowledge to our students. And they are learning mentors, and a lot of teachers are actually quite hopeful about the possibilities of using AI to free them up from the more mundane sort of things that they might be doing in classes, and actually giving them more of that incredibly important relational time to make a big difference in students' lives.
We'll talk about some of those freeing ups a little bit later, but Jodie, how do you see AI transform? If you look into your crystal ball, and I'm going to ask you to be a bit specific too. What do you see? What's a classroom of the future going to look like?
Good question. I think that there's a lot of potential for things we've heard about already today, like personalised learning support, or freeing up time for teachers to spend more time doing other things, like say speaking and talking and doing things like that, if they're supported by AI-assisted tools. I think there's, when we, some of the possibilities I think we're just kind of trying to grapple with now, even the ability to have this tool that we can use to, provoke ideas and debate and discuss. And, I've read about classrooms that are using it in project-based learning situations to, say, talk to the space station, but it's an AI fueling those conversations, So I think that there are many potentials and possibilities that we're just starting to uncover.
Matt, one of the things that, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've written a book on creative technologies for students. Is AI a creative technology?
It can be. So this is again something that can go either way depending on how you use it. If you want to outsource all of your creativity to the AI, you most certainly can choose to do so. You can ask it to write you an essay, to create an image, to produce a video, create a presentation, any of those things. And you can totally outsource your voice to AI and totally circumvent the whole purpose of education. And I don't think, as sort of Paul alluded to earlier, that the purpose of education really has shifted that much now that we have AI. We always knew that students need to develop their mind and find their voice and find their purpose and develop that self-motivation and self-regulation. But now the playing field has changed a bit, and I think that's sort of something that we're grappling with, how that playing field now changes with AI.
What do you mean by changing the playing field? I'm not sure I understand the term.
Well, you never had the capacity to reach to AI to, if you're trying to create, creative technologies education. If you are trying to write a computer program, or you're trying to design a multimedia presentation, you never had the ability to just go to AI and get it to do that for you. Now that you do, we're sort of having to readjust how we set tasks, how we define tasks, the parameters around how we assess them, and it's pushing us towards more authentic, personalised, process-oriented, meaningful and collaborative learning, teaching and assessing, which are all really good things, and probably we knew earlier on before AI that we needed to head in that direction, but AI is now sort of almost insisting for us that we do go in that direction.
But how do we know that this stuff works? I mean, there's a now famous MIT study that said, and it said in rather awkward formal language, it said that using AI lowers neural activity. There was the headline in the conversation said that AI rots your brain. Jodie?
Can I sit in this? Okay. Yes, and we've seen that study that was released a couple of weeks ago with sensational headlines, that ChatGPT can rot your brains, and was based on an MIT study that came out. And this is why I think the importance of critical thinking about all this topic is so important, because when you read this study, it was a study of 54, I'm going to say, people, and there were 3 groups of people, and one of the groups, they were testing writing essays. And the third group, they just said, use ChatGPT to write your essay. So what that group did was literally just cut and paste the essay question, pressed return, it spat out an essay, and they submitted that. And then they did brain scans of neural activities, and of course there was less neural activity than someone who had done the process of write the essay. And so then you see the sensational headlines. But the point being is that I could ask you to write my essay for me, and I could submit that to my class and have a brain scan, and I would argue that my brain scan would probably not show much neural activity as well. So there were only 18 brain scans done in that study, and of that, the third of that was the ChatGPT group. So I would argue they didn't teach the participants how to use AI effectively. They used it in a way that was ineffective for learning processes. So it's how you use the tool. And you can use it to just spit out something for you. And you can also use it to do very deep, complicated learning processes that,
because Paul, I guess this is one of the keys, isn't it? That it is how the students interact with it, and you've set up NSWEduChat in a way that encourages students to ask questions and to engage in Socratic questioning. But the system is only going to spit out answers that are as good as the questions that are put into it. Are you confident that the students will be able to use it in a way that achieves the kind of learning outcomes that you want? Have you built the guide rails strong enough to make sure that happens?
So am I confident? I'm confident that the guardrails are there in a particular way. I mean, we're drawing on the same large language models that everyone else is drawing on.
So it's built on ChatGPT.
So it's
just
built
a kind of
AI. Yeah. So we're drawing on the same large language models. So my confidence would be the same as anyone else's around the ability to spit those answers out. I want to go back to the education point, and I know that when we were talking earlier, one of the things that we see emerging is the importance of kind of prompting. So being able to educate both teachers and students to be able to really effectively ask questions in a way that is going to generate that response. Like, I can't help but always come back to there's an education process to be able to get the best benefit out of it. So my confidence will always be dependent on the education process that's gone in place beforehand to ensure that we are getting the best outcomes. Will it still have hallucinations, and will some of the things be wrong? Yes, they will. Will it still have bias, and some of the things contain bias? Yes, it will. Do we need to make sure that we're then teaching and ensuring that we've got that critical thinking embedded in the way that we engage with the tool? Yes, we do need to. So I don't think there's any escaping that there's an education role in and around how you engage with the tools.
Jodie, do you want to just talk about some of your work around prompting? Because Paul alluded to the importance of prompting. You've done quite a lot of work in looking into how students can and should be taught to prompt.
Yeah, for sure. So the work I've been doing with my colleague, Dr. Brian Bolson-Stanton, looks at when you interact with a large language model. So, learning and this is part of AI literacy too, that's now being agreed upon around the world, that's so necessary to teach our teachers and our students, which involves a little bit of technical understanding of how the tool works. So this is getting to that prompting thing and how that impacts the output you get from AI. But also, just quickly with the AI literacy, it's also a practical understanding of how the tool can work for you in your context. So for me as a teacher would be perhaps a different use of the tool for what a student might use the tool for. And then there's that ethical component as well that's so important that everyone agrees on. But the technical side of interacting with a large language model, just learning about how firstly, that there's no person behind the screen, that it's a mathematical statistical algorithm prediction model that predicts the likelihood of the next word and then, builds off that. So even showing students, last week I was in India and worked with some students and just showed them a little bit about the transformer models and how complicated it is. And they were all just like, and just astounded that there wasn't a person behind the screen answering their queries. So when you say, what pet should I buy? It's a statistical probability algorithm and it's going to say dog. because on the internet and training dialogue, most likely that will be the word that comes. So just debunking, I think, some of these myths about what it is and what it isn't is super important.
I'm going to go back to some of the basics. I mean, I remember when I was at school, part of the learning process was struggling with stuff, was actually having the friction. There's a wonderful philosopher, Stanley Cavell, who describes the process of education as literally learning how to walk, of learning how to find your balance, of putting one foot in front of another, until it becomes automatic. We've all, I'm sure all of us have wrestled with maths equations, not really getting it and trying to figure it out on the page. And it's kind of dealing with that difficult process early on of putting words on a page. That's all a part of the learning process. Are we in danger of making it too seamless, Matt? Too frictionless in a way that actually undermines that process of learning itself?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that's the biggest risk posed by AI, is that students will outsource the opportunity to learn and use AI as an answer machine rather than a learning machine. And so much of the work that we have to do is really dispositional and attitudinal. And that's hard work too. And I don't think anyone really has the answers to that. But the answers to that doesn't lie in the AI. It lies in people. It lies in teachers. People are inspired to be great learners and thinkers by other people. They look to their teachers as role models. And it's so through that sort of valuing of learning, valuing of education, that they will hopefully learn to use AI as another way to help them learn wonderfully. It could be a total renaissance in education, should we be able to help students treat it in a way that helps them learn rather than just gives them the answers.
Paul, but do you recognise the problem that Matt referred to in a way that that students may use AI as an information tool rather than as a learning tool?
Oh, absolutely recognise it. I think we had this very conversation at the Sydney Morning Herald Summit earlier in the year. There's no denying that the genuine and real risks that lie around being able to, look to tools like generative AI to replace effort. I will steal your word. To replace effort and to kind of outsource and supplant your learning. And again, we come back to that educative process around how we can use AI. And then I would say, actually, and that's where classrooms matter, and that's where teachers matter, and that's where choices around deliberate use of AI in a classroom, as opposed to just because it's there, we should, or just because we've got it, we should. But it's around making deliberate decisions about when and how AI might be used in the context of a classroom, and when and how it might be used in the context of teaching and learning, and what are the deliberate strategies that I as a teacher use in the classroom to support my students to engage ethically in the way that they use AI, and to think really carefully around how they use AI. I mean, I go back to the point before around, I could get you to write my work and I wouldn't be thinking. The ethics of cheating has not changed through the tools that you use. So those things around how we ethically use tools that are available to us and our responsibilities as a learner in that process don't change. And that becomes a really important part of what teachers should do in a classroom when they choose to use an AI tool.
But Matt, not so long ago you were on Channel 7, I think, and you were throwing up a statistic that said that 74% of students were planning to use AI in assessments, and 70% of teachers saw that as cheating, as a form of plagiarism. How do we reconcile those numbers? How do we get to that? How do we find a way of ethically using it? Because the temptation to rely on ChatGPT, yes, to cheat, but it's so much easier to do it. It's right there on everyone's laptop.
Yeah, so recently Macquarie University and other universities have adjusted their assessment policies and processes to really demarcate those assessment tasks where actually we want people to use AI as part of what they're doing because it's a very authentic task. And that's the way of the future. There's no point sort of pretending that AI is not going to be a part of our world or isn't a part of our world now. We need to acknowledge that and help people, acquire the skills to be successful in that world. So that's one form of assessment, and then we sort of say, well, yeah, AI is expected, but you're going to have to do more than just give me an AI response. You're going to have to add value. You're going to have to contextualize. You're going to have to show your own personal reflection. You might be asked, in addition to a hand-in assignment, to attend a viva voce or defend or debate or any of those things that can make assessment tasks that integrate AI more resilient to sort of non-learning approaches to using AI. And then there's another form of assessment where we say, look, for this, you need to have the learning on board. You're not going to be able to turn to AI, for instance, if you're in a classroom and you're learning to be a teacher, and be able to turn to AI to tell you how to respond in a certain situation. So we will examine you without the assistance of AI, and demarcating those two types of assessment, making very clear to students when and why we're using both, helps, I think, to both prepare students for a future where AI is definitely going to play an increasing role, but also make sure that in other assessment tasks they're learning and they have that embodied understanding that they can apply when they need to.
You mentioned assessments, and of course marking is the bane of every teacher's existence. But it is a really important, my instinct, my suspicion is that a hell of a lot of marking is going to be outsourced to AI. Paul, is that something that is going to happen? Do you see that as a part of the way that the department is moving?
I don't see it as part of the way the department is moving in the short term. I think, look, there's already...
Isn't it inevitable, though?
Look, there's already a lot of work that's happening in the space of automated essay scoring. So it's not like it doesn't exist already. At the moment, the things that I suppose we're really focused on in assessment is, to Matt's point, is around understanding how we grapple with how students might be using a tool in supporting their assessments. And, again, going to that principle of transparency in the Australian framework, around being clear around when AI can be used and how AI can be used and how you are transparent about its use is a really important part of that assessment process. I do know that some of our schools use it to help them to develop rubrics for assessment, and they are starting to experiment with having a look at how assessments line up against a rubric. But I'm not aware of any of our schools that have started to go down the path of looking at outsourcing assessment, but certainly looking at how the tool can support them around assessment is one of the things that our teachers are looking at.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
I guess it's a big question too about, which we haven't really touched on, this an issue of agency and an issue of judgment. So we've got a very powerful tool that is fantastic at creating rubrics, and you know what? If I'm a tired and busy teacher and I have the right inputs and I have a tool that can help me quickly and I judge the output and I reflect on the output and go, actually, this is valid and useful and, provokes my thinking, but ultimately the agency remains with me, then that's my choice to use. And then I can have my night free to be with my family. Like, how is that? Like, it depends on the use.
It does, but it's a very, very small step from what you're talking about to just letting AI do all the work. Really. I mean, let's face it.
But it's the judgment of the outputs. That's like the critical skills we need to be modelling and scaffolding and teaching our students and ourselves. And the way that your input, the language you use, the way you structure your prompts, the way you ask me questions one at a time, rather, the way you frame what you're asking it directly impacts what you get out of it. So that it's
Matt,
the skill of it, you know.
Matt, you sort of drew in some breath as Jodie was talking.
Yeah, look, my thoughts on this are that there's a whole, I see both sides. As a teacher, there's a whole lot of repetitive, automated sort of assessment that you're doing, that we already have quizzes that will auto-mark multiple choice responses and then short answer. And actually students can, if they want to, do those practice assessment tasks and upload the marking rubric and their practice essays to AI and get responses and marking from AI right now. AI also can do it in a much more reliable way, giving much faster feedback without delay in ways that humans simply cannot because of the amount of work involved. However, there's this extra layer that I think is really important that we often forget about with assessment that relates to the relational side of assessment that is actually probably even maybe the most important part. That if you've got a student submitting you an AI response and you decide to use AI to mark it and we cut humans out of the educational process, well, that's one possibility. But what about if you say to students, look, for this essay, I want really to hear your voice on this, and I'm not going to judge it right or wrong, but I want to help you develop your voice. And if you really do that and don't use AI, I tell you what, I'm going to respond with my personal thoughts. And it may not be what AI thinks, but it's what me as your teacher thinks, and we can have a conversation about that. And then all of a sudden, assessment takes a whole much more authentic and meaningful sort of dimension and form. And perhaps so AI is helping to do some of the more tedious, but we're able to do more authentic assessment because we've got time away from that more tedious.
But this also raises a really interesting element of education. There's the formal education, of course, there are the facts and pieces of information and the skills that we teach our students. But organically through that process are the human relationships and the negotiation that goes on. And as a student, getting criticism can be awkward and icky, but a necessary part of the process. One of the things we've learned about AI, anyone who's used ChatGPT knows, it never gets mad at you. It never argues with you. We saw you try to engage it in a debate, it refused. It's always nice, and frankly, the world isn't like that. And don't we need that again? That friction as a part of our education to develop the social skills. Paul, is that something you guys are worried about?
So we would call it feedback, not criticism, and we would make sure that feedback was kind of, I suppose, grounded in what it is that we want students to learn, know and understand in the first place. So we would be clear around what our learning intentions were in setting out, that lesson, that unit, that course of study. And we would give feedback to a student based on what we know about them as a learner, where they are as a learner, and that feedback would be designed to move them forward. So yes, absolutely, challenge them to be able to take that kind of step towards improvement and strengthening their learning. Not all students take feedback well, not all adults take feedback well, but you're right, it is part of that learning process to be able to know that actually feedback helps me improve.
But also feedback from a human that might be a little bit frustrated or irritated or whatever. I mean, it's a human feedback. It's not a machine feedback.
And I would argue that I don't think that AI should replace that role of a teacher in a classroom in the way that engages with student in being able to give them feedback and be able to stretch them in their learning in a classroom. Classrooms are not homogenous places. The kids are at very different levels in a classroom, and the role of the teacher is understanding where those students are and what it is that I need to do to push them forward.
And there's also, can I just add on? So once you understand a little bit more about how system prompts work with large language models, it's in the system prompt to be cheery and confident. So that's how those system prompts go with your input. So it will always be cheery and confident. Whether it's correct is debatable, but that response. But you can actually then play with that and tell it to push back and tell it to, dial down the cheeriness and all of that. So that's learning to work with the tool. And
yeah, I don't know how many of us are going to tell ChatGPT to get cranky with us.
There are studies now of, students that who like that praise and feedback and cheery and confident, and think that the feedback is beneficial and more detailed than what perhaps they've gotten. So, we live.
If I'm asking AI for feedback on my work, I'm telling it to be as critical as possible. I want this to be a super submission, and I want you to tell me any way that I might be able to improve this. So I suppose it depends on your purpose, and AI can take on whatever role just about that you'd like it to. So there are, we have an army of sort of virtual assistants, and we can try to think about how we use them for different purposes.
I would like to think that students do that, but again, it seems to me that this is something that you also want from a human rather than from a machine. And again, you know that a human, if you get mad at the way that a human has given you information, there are consequences. If you can get as mad as you like to the screen, there's going to be no consequence there. We're out of time for the panel discussion, but before we move to audience questions, I do want to jump in with something that Tamika raised with me, and that's the question of the way that minorities are represented in this. We know that if this is based on ChatGPT, as Paul, you said it is, the dominant culture is white English-speaking men. There is a whole world of minority groups, of indigenous communities that aren't well represented in the AI. Good teachers can spot that. You mentioned that they can account for biases and hallucinations in the system. But the more that this gets used, it seems to me, and the real worry of people like Tamika, is that those cultures get marginalised, suppressed, or distorted and flattened out into two-dimensional caricatures. Is that something that we should be worried about? I'm certainly concerned about it.
So I would say to some degree, yes, but part of the way that we respond to that worry is to make sure that we say, this is not the work of AI. This is not work that you engage with AI. This is work that, so if we think about Aboriginal communities, this is work that you engage with in community and through conversation and through listening to voice. And there are things that you absolutely might not do using AI as a tool. And again, part of that educative process in understanding this is not work that you do with AI. This won't be representative. This won't have the voice of community. And you need to engage in a different way if this is what you're looking for and this is what you're learning about. And that's that educative process. And I would say you cannot effectively harness AI without the educative process.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right, I think we're going to go to audience questions now. And we've got an iPad coming up with Slido questions. And we also have a number of roving microphones. I will go first to some of the Slido questions. First up, would the tool ever challenge a student response? So if a student was racist, for example, would it say, that's a great point, or would it identify and challenge racism? Paul?
So if you're asking about the EduChat tool,
yes,
absolutely yes. We have a whole range of filters that would be built into that would detect use of profanity, use of racial slurs, those sorts of things. So yes, and that is one of the safeguards that we've absolutely built into the tool. Sometimes those restrictions can have a counter effect in that it will sometimes restrict some legitimate curriculum content that it sees as somewhat controversial, for example. But at the moment, we're erring on the side of risk and caution. And yes, EduChat will. Because I almost exclusively use EduChat and not any other form of Gen AI at the moment. I couldn't answer it for the others.
Usually they're into the system prompts as well, so yeah, those things. It'll say, sorry, that's, I can't answer that question.
So the boundaries, the boundaries, the ethical boundaries are already written into the software.
We've built a number of them to protect the safeguards for our young people, yes.
Okay, another question. How can AI strengthen core skills like literacy and numeracy? And there's a quote from a headline, NAPLAN results show 1/3 of students are below literacy and numeracy expectations. Matt,
You
do you
go,
want to take this back?
Yeah, sure. So again, it boils back to whether we decide and can encourage students to use it to help them learn rather than give them the answers. We have a whole new host of opportunities for every child to practice. You can even take past NAPLAN tests, ask it to produce similar questions to give you feedback on your attempts. You can ask it just to teach you about verbs and adjectives, and these are, obviously things that quite young children might not do spontaneously, and therefore it comes back to teachers and parents understanding how to help students learn to use AI to help them learn.
Yeah, because you can say, write me an essay on XYZ, and it will. It'll just spit it out straight away. Or you can say, I need your help, I need to write an essay, help me by asking me questions one at a time to structure my thoughts, or however it is that you reframe that prompt, and it'll say, sure, no worries, here's the first question, and so that is a way more thoughtful and engaging way.
Can I add just a little bit more too, because I think it's really important with AI to not just play catch up to where it is now, but also to really think forward to where it's heading. Already it's multimodal, so any student who's struggling with a maths question can hold up, the ChatGPT app to the question and say, look, I'm really struggling with this Pythagorean problem. Can you sort of help me understand where I'm making mistakes? So again, whether they're using it to just do their homework for them, or whether they're using it in a way that helps them when they're stuck, is the million-dollar question. But it's increasingly multimodal and intelligent. So we shouldn't be just thinking in terms of text where we're talking to it. It can see and observe and read our screens, and increasingly we'll have agency. It already can go out to the internet, search for things, give you answers, book flights, whatever it is. So,
can I take AI out of the equation completely and say that literacy and numeracy is built on incredibly strong foundations in the early years of school, and I can't imagine any early years kindergarten, year 1 or 2 teacher outsourcing their explicit teaching of those foundational literacy and numeracy skills in the early years of school to an AI tool.
All right, let's go to some audience questions. Can we have some house lights up? We've got a couple of roving microphones at the moment. Are there any hands? I've got a hand right down the front row here. Just wait for the microphone so everyone else can hear you.
Just a couple of points. Thank you. I'm much more positive about AI after tonight. However, I am a bit skeptical. It's not really Socratic. We all know that the Socratic method were people sitting around talking to each other. We also have research which is telling us people are coming out of schools less able to communicate with each other, less able to get along well together. I'm wondering what you're doing to look at what else happens in the classroom about how kids talk to each other, about how teachers work with kids. I know some are very good. I don't want to put them down. But if you're only looking at how AI is impacting the content and the academic things you have to learn, what are you doing to say, how do we balance that with the social skills that many of our young people need right now?
Paul?
So I suppose my first comment to that would be that AI is like an incredibly small part of what we would be doing in supporting our teachers in our schools and classrooms at the moment. We're in the middle of curriculum reform. We're rolling out a whole stack of new syllabus that has a particular focus on, deep content knowledge. And all of our curriculum teams, as they're out there supporting our teachers to think about, new curriculum and new content, are not talking about how AI plays a role in that. So, there's an enormous amount of work that we do with our teachers through professional learning around, kind of the most effective pedagogies for teaching in particular subjects and disciplines. And I would say across many of them, and there'd be principals in the audience who I've spotted tonight who would talk about how important it is to have students engaging in their learning in a classroom with each other, with the teacher in those conversations. AI would be the tiniest little slice, and in fact at the moment for students we're still only using it in 50 schools as we're starting to learn. But what we are seeing in some of those schools is the students are still engaging with each other, even though they're using AI as a tool. In some of that work, they're still engaging with each other in those critical conversations. Our observations in those schools is that we're not increasingly seeing kids sitting in isolation, just engaging with the tool, that kind of collaborative work in a classroom is still occurring and doesn't appear to be being outsourced. And that's the opportunity that we've been getting by trialling and being able to really see what's happening in those classrooms before we do anything else.
Can I add to that? Just with what we were talking about in Dublin with the UNESCO AI learning design team, is that this idea of pedagogically enhanced, or supported AI literacy. And I would argue that that's quite social with what we're talking about. So sitting in these critical conversations with your learners, being a learner with them and talking about the prompts, like getting into the awkward and sitting in the what happened and let's talk through that, and learning through this new technology together, being vulnerable as a teacher, as a student, and really having those social conversations. That's quite important.
But that raises another question, because that's fine in the classroom, but what is available, the thing that students will confront when they go home is ChatGPT.
And look, further to the point, which is a really important one immediately and in the long term, that a lot of school counsellors are reporting that students are forming relationships with chatbots that then leads to disappointment, that leads to if the chatbot sort of gets discontinued, and all sorts of really sort of new complicated things relating to forming relationships with technology that are well beyond the bounds of we've had in the past, and that we're really having to think on our feet and address in real time. So I just want to validate the points that you're raising and say that these are big issues that we all need to sort of grapple with.
And I don't think we talked about social things at all this evening, and I think that needs to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Right. There's another question. A lady with a white cap, about 4 rows back.
Thanks. Hi. First, thank you so much. Just my question, I used to tutor kids from 7th to 11th grade, and all of them were addicted and very dependent on AI. My only question is that if you're pushing critical thinking through AI tools, why, they're using AI to avoid that, so why would they not just go back to ChatGPT instead of EduChat, which asks them difficult questions, instead of just going to ChatGPT and having the work done for them?
That is a really good question, and certainly one that you're not the first person that's asked us that. Absolutely, kids can engage at home, they can outsource their learning, they can supplant their learning, they can do all of those sorts of things. I suppose I would then come back to, that's an ongoing role of teachers in a classroom to kind of create in their classrooms and in their students this kind of responsibility for myself and my own learning. And I think, again, we were talking earlier around self-regulation and what that means in terms of your responsibilities. That's kind of like a core part of a teacher's job, is to support students to understand that actually I have some responsibilities here in kind of part of this learning process. And yes, AI is probably making it easier for kids to be able to supplant their learning. It just reinforces, I think, even more how the role of the teacher in that classroom, in the way they work with students, plays, and we can use that influence that we have in that time, that we have with students in our classroom, as best we can to try and do those things. What we would hope that happens with EduChat, and it's certainly one of the intentions, is that students learn a different way of engaging with an AI tool and see the benefits of, actually this is what happens when I start to engage in learning that stretches my thinking and has me playing a role rather than just outsourcing. But that's always the learning process that you're going through with students in classrooms. As a teacher, there will always be things that kids can do outside of school to either, shortcut, supplant, replace. And we're always challenging.
Other questions too, such as, if we make the assessment so high stakes and so pressurised that, people feel so stressed that there's an easy option just to provide you some answer. I mean, that's a whole nother issue. And then the type of assessment now that you're setting for students to do at home, if it's easily able to be given to a tool that can do it for you in an instant, and then you need to be questioning the design of that as well, and the big questions of what is learning and what are you going to look for to show signs of learning that has occurred.
I have another question that I'll take from Slido, and then we'll go back to the audience. The question is from Ian. How effective is EduChat for students with cognitive disabilities or significant learning support needs? Can they access EduChat? Is that something that is going to support special needs kids?
So EduChat in and of itself, for students to be engaged with it, you will have seen, you're going to require a level of literacy. So one of the things that you also saw Dan demonstrate is the voice output. So we're exploring enhancements like voice input as well as voice output. So it's a tool in development to be able to think about how we support those learners. At the moment, the trial with students is not specifically targeted to that group of students, but it is an area that we're kind of interested in. And Dan, who was up here doing the demo for us before, and his team of developers are always looking at ways to be able to enhance and make those tools more inclusive for students. But it is, a genuine question around how do we make these things more inclusive and accessible for students. Continued challenge for us, I think, in many of the tools. That said, we work a lot with our principals who work in some of work with students with disabilities in some of our more specialised settings, who often talk to us around AI tools that they do see are really beneficial for those students. So it might not be EduChat, but it might be other tools that are really beneficial for those students. And I often come across, the president of the Special Education Principals and Leaders Association, SEPLA. He's quite enthusiastic around what he can see as some tools that are really benefiting for those learners. So it might not be EduChat. It might not be the tool for everyone. There might be others.
Matt, you look as though you're nodding ahead.
Just to say that, I think that's one of the areas of really promising potential. But just imagining every student with special needs having personalised assistance, and we're also quite used, I think, to thinking about sort of large language models as AI or generative AI, where it's all text-based, but it's interfacing as we speak with robotics as well, and again, it can have vision, it can hear, and the ability to have a personal assistant to cater to your needs, be it physical or behavioural or any sort of needs, is possibly really powerful.
But doesn't that go back to what we were talking about earlier in removing not just the ability of a teacher, a person, a human teacher, from having that relationship, that's outsourced to a machine. There might be value in that, but a teacher, we still need that human connection. We still need the kind of social contact that our first questioner was talking about.
So the way I would envisage it is it's an assistive technology to help a student engage and interact in a classroom and with the teacher that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. We simply.
But that also means that the teachers don't ever get, or may not ever get, to that kind of interaction at a personal level.
So we'd obviously have to be very careful about how we did it, but I would hope that there would be extensive teacher interaction, but it's just that we simply can't resource one teacher for every student, and just having increased access to learning support for students with high needs is an area of great potential.
I think the word is enhance learning. Like, if this is a tool and it can enhance learning, then that's the focus.
And I won't remember the name of the study, but there was some work in the US, and it was not necessarily even AI, but it was the use of digital technologies and tools to increase the dosage of support of an intervention. So students were getting a small group tuition intervention, they were getting, say 3 sessions a week with a teacher, and in the intervening days a week, they were accessing technology that increased the dosage and saw an increase of outcomes. So it's in tandem, teacher input with an additional input from a technology that helps reinforce those skills, then back into the teacher to do the push, then a reinforce of the skills. So there's opportunities for these things to work in tandem that increases the dosage, that has the potential to improve outcomes for kids.
I guess that's where the skeptic in me comes in, because I can see a creeping encroachment of the technology sort of pushing out that contact. I mean, I agree with you that would be the ideal. It certainly sounds ideal, but I worry about the way that the economics of these things might go. Let's have another couple of audience questions. There's a question right up the front.
I just wanted to ask about how you see the role of parents in all of this. So we've been often, spent most of the evening talking about students and teachers and teaching and learning. But how do we educate parents and bring parents on board so that they are also part of this process of education? Because as with social media, we find that if parents are not understanding the tools and helping their children at home to engage with these things, and we're not doing it as a whole school community, it is less successful. So what do you see as how do we educate parents in this space?
I'd say it's probably, you go, Matt, and then I'll jump up.
I think it's a really important point. Typically, and with any use of technology, be it games, social media, the involvement of the parent is really important, not to just say, okay, you do it over there, but actually by doing it with children, having conversations with them. Some people are sometimes surprised. I'm a technology professor, but I really limit the amount of technology that my children use, and I use it sort of with them and do it in sort of...
Speaking from the microphone.
Do it with as sort of teachable moments, so that it's not just sort of unfettered and unregulated use, that they really do need to be guided, I think, by parents.
That takes us to a couple of questions and a theme that seems to have come through on a lot of the Slido questions, and that's around the age at which it's appropriate to let kids engage with AI. We're all struggling with kids and screens. AI seems like just one more potentially hyper-addictive thing for kids that ultimately disrupts old-fashioned play. When is it appropriate for kids to start engaging with AI? Jodie?
Well, it's an interesting question, because it's becoming embedded in all tools that we use. Spotify recommendations, YouTube recommendations are all AI-enhanced tools. Netflix recommendations, Google Maps, and a lot of technologies that you're using as a family, let alone children.
I think, but we're talking about chatbots.
Specifically, okay. When you're talking about tools such as ChatGPT, they're 13 years plus you're allowed to have an account, but it's recommended to have parental approval for that. And same with Gemini and, the big ones like that. Claude.ai is 18 years plus, so that's interesting. But it was, like I say, just talking about last week in India, they didn't actually have technology in their school at all. And yet when I talked about different tools, and particularly ChatGPT, they all had accounts, and the teachers were just beside themselves going home and, using these tools. So in terms of learning about how it works, I think parents for sure have to be included in the upskilling of how these tools work and what makes them function and what risks and ethics and all the things we've been talking about.
Paul, do we stick EduChat into primary schools?
So at the moment, EduChat's in trial in a number of primary schools, only for year 5 and 6. So only available for those upper primary years. And I think if we were to do anything more, our intention wouldn't be any younger than that. I want to go back to that question just really quickly. One of the things, the way we engage parents as partners in schooling cuts across everything that you do in school, like not just AI and technology. It's changes in the way that we teach, keeping parents informed of what we're doing in schools is a really important part of that relationship that schools should have with their community. I go back to that notion of transparency, that communication with families around what it is that we're doing and how we're doing is really important. But I also think there's a piece here around, and Matt reflects on it himself as a parent, there's a piece here around educating yourself as a parent around AI, what the risks are, starting to form some of your own opinions, making yourself aware. So I think, there's two sides to that coin as well, as, thinking about what can I do as a parent to understand this? What decisions can I make around how I want my children to engage in AI, knowing that, ChatGPT and Gemini and the others, as you just talked about, they've got age recommendations, but they also don't have the safeguards that we've built into EduChat. So there is a piece there around what am I letting my kids do and engage with at home. And then there's that awareness piece around the fact that you're going to accidentally use AI because it's built into so many things without you even knowing.
All right. More audience questions. Any hands? There's a hand again up the front, and I'll see if we can find one or two towards the back. Then the third row, where are our microphones? We have some.
Over here?
Okay, right at the back, okay. And then we'll come to the lady in the front. Do you mind just getting the microphone? Can we get the microphone to the lady here, and then we'll come to you after the gentleman at the back.
So I wanted to follow up on the subject about the relationship with the teachers, parents, and transparency with the students, and how the risks or potential of how students can kind of push out the adults with the relationship with the AI, because I would think there's a lot of potential that they could use this more for a very personal relationship, like something like a counselor would, and I think it brings up a lot more issues with all the data being collected, and how do teachers and parents have access to this data that is being collected by minors, and how, there's no regulation as far as I know with all this to privacy with whatever you use an AI for. Whatever you put on there is collected data.
So you're concerned about privacy issues with the data that lies behind? and
Yeah.
data collection.
Yeah, and how do parents or any teachers have a right or access to this data? That, you know, that kids are, who knows what they're talking about with this technology.
Matt, you look as though you've got an answer for that.
Yeah, well, I don't have an answer, but I do have a response. So the concerns you raise are incredibly important. I'll just mention a project that Macquarie University is leading at the moment, New South Wales government-funded project looking at best practice in screen use in education. And in your question, you've identified the 4 sort of pillars that we are broaching the question from. Because you're absolutely right. Often we look at the use of technology in education just about does it or doesn't it improve learning outcomes? And the evidence tends to suggest if it's used well, yes, it really can. But they're sort of around that, circumscribing the use for education, are 3 other dimensions, which as well-being, and what are the impacts of technology on the well-being of children. There's also cyber safety and security, and there's also equity. And these are all things that really, if we're going to be making decisions, we need to be considering simultaneously. And so every time we make a decision, and part of this project is going to be to produce resources that help all stakeholders, principals, parents, teachers, students, to weigh up all of that to help them make decisions. So it's not something where we're going to say, well, this is exactly how much time you should spend, and this is exactly how you should use it. But I think by giving people as much information about it so that they can make the decisions that they feel is best for them, their family, their school, etc.
Let's just take the last question for the evening before we wrap up. Was it the lady in the front? Yeah.
Hi, I'm a mom of 2, and they are studying in the school now. So I'm very glad to be part of the seminar today, so I could learn like new perspectives from teachers and also the Department of Education. So at my work, I use AI a lot. So I'm kind of like confused and panic at the same time, because more like lots of tedious work and creative work can be replaced by the AI. So at the same time, we have massive amount of learning resources supported by the technology. So in the parent, I have a general question about the AI and education. So as a parent, what shall we focus on the children to do? How can we help them empower their future by using the AI? Or like what other skills we should focus on?
So in other words, you're talking about how do we teach kids to use AI in real life, not just as a teaching tool?
No, my question is like most of all can be done by the technology. So are there like what skills shall we focus on parenting children?
Matt?
Yeah, I can start kicking that off because I've been thinking a lot about this. You know, we're going into such an uncertain future. They're talking about whole professions, you know, job losses, and particularly for the more automated work. Various estimates around sort of 1/3 of all work in various professions might be automated. So what do we tell our students to study and focus on? They still need to learn the curriculum, learn how to learn, embrace that, because no matter what job you have, you're going to need to know how to process information, think critically, all of those things. Typically, there's been an emphasis on the 4 C's, critical thinking, creativity, communication and collaboration, which is still incredibly important. But I think increasingly as technology becomes more intelligent and can do a lot of the creative work and automated work, that we need to double down on the human things. We need humans to be able to make good decisions, and to make good decisions based on the human capabilities that the technology really won't be able to do. It doesn't have the same contextual understanding, and I call them the 4 E's. I think empathy. We need humans to know really how to read other humans, to understand and to empathize with them. We need to focus on ethics, because we've got all this information, but we need to know how to make good decisions based on that. And that's also the personal ethics of not using AI in ways that are just sort of cheating, but also the social, what's going to be good for society. We need them to be enterprising, because people who know how to use AI well and just generally sort of have the initiative to do things with it are going to be the more successful, both intrinsically and possibly financially. And the last one is engagement, that we need students to be engaged in class, yes, but also engaged in society, to have sort of a moral compass around doing things that are going to be good and purposeful.
Matt, thank you very much.
I just want to say, because I know you said you've got young children, I'm just going to seize this opportunity to go, let's not forget those really important things that we do, right? Read with your children. Make sure that you spend time with your children, play games with your children. Let's not lose all of those really important things that we do in this kind of panic around automation and technology and AI and all those sorts of things. And then it's around your role as a parent in asking questions. How do you know that? Why do you think that? And in constantly encouraging that, actually, I'm in this process, I have to think, I have to learn, I have to be able to answer questions. They're kind of simple things that you can do as a parent to just kind of continue to make sure that your kids are, developing that kind of social skill and those thinking skills as they kind of progress through schooling and into the world.
Great. Thank you very much to our panellists. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an extraordinary conversation this evening. I think those last comments have really summed things up remarkably well. We've dealt with the impact of AI on pedagogy, on teaching. We've talked about its potential impact on human relationships. We've talked about the way that it potentially impacts on creativity and creative learning. We've talked about assessments. And we've also talked about the way that parents themselves can and should engage with their kids and AI. I guess if there is one thing that's abundantly clear from this conversation, the question is not whether or not it should be in our classrooms, but it's how we bring it into the classrooms in a way that is going to be effective, because whether we like it or not, AI is absolutely here to stay. Ladies and gentlemen, please once again bring your hands together to thank Paul Wood, Jodie Torrington and Matt Bauer. Thank you very much. And thank you also to you for coming out on a wet evening in Sydney. Thank you.
We have a program called T2 where students are trying to gain work placements and also employment in meaningful jobs like apprenticeships and traineeships. So we got the students to do a cover letter to apply for a job that they found on Seek. So Taylor had written his application and he'd identified plenty of great things about himself, and he'd given examples of the different things that he'd done on work placements. But the way that he'd written it wasn't really appropriate for the audience of an employer receiving it, in that it wasn't a very sophisticated piece of writing. So Taylor and I sat down with NSWEduChat and we got him to enter some of the things that he'd done and then ask NSWEduChat if it could change the wording of it so that it would be more suitable for that purpose. And it did that for him, and he did that in chunks. Some of the things that came out were a bit too sophisticated, and they certainly weren't the language that he would use. So we looked at what the NSWEduChat had given him and said, well, would you really say those words? Do you know what those words mean? And when he said no, we then refined it so that it still sounded like his voice, and then was able to put back together a letter that was quite effective.
It was for education purposes, to try and get an apprenticeship for a mechanic. The first time I used NSWEduChat, it was for a cover letter, and it didn't have the quiet language and wasn't in a formal way. Then Miss Scobie came in one day and showed me this new tool called NSWEduChat, and then we together wrote a new cover letter which added all my skills in one sentence. Helped me a lot, and then I sent through the cover letter, got it back, and they said thank you for your application, they'll get back to me soon.
We're really only dipping our toe into what's possible to be used across the whole school, and it is spreading exponentially, but it's something that we could take so much further and be able to use in so many more ways.